my name's Ian Bailey. I'm the General Manager at M.A.C Solutions. And as part of our security series, we're delighted to present a webinar here on security in the energy industry. We've got Noel Slane here from OPSWAT and also George, and they're going to give us a very good presentation today on what they see in the industry and also how OPSWAT solves many of the issues that arise there. So this is part of the overall M.A.C Solutions offering, where we look not only at connect and analyze, which you'll have seen in the different offerings we have, but also at secure. And we've got a fantastic broad cybersecurity offering, of which OPSWAT takes pride of place. I'm now going to hand over to Noel to start his part of the presentation.
Okay, thanks, Ian. Much appreciated. Delighted to be here and to participate with M.A.C Solutions in today's webinar. I hope you get a lot from it. Just in terms of the format of what we're going to cover off today, we'll walk through an agenda. We're going to take a look at some current challenges in the space, so energy and critical manufacturing. Take a look at the anatomy of an attack, something that's a real life event, how and why and where it's relevant. Towards the end, we'll take a look at the OPSWAT solution stack, how it can help prevent and provide a solution to some of the key challenges that are faced within the energy and critical manufacturing space. And at the end, we'll leave some time for a question and answering session. And just by way of introductions, I'm the VP of Regional Sales with OPSWAT for the EMEA region, and I'm co-hosting and delivering today with George Cherikesh, who's our Sales Engineer and Manager for the EMEA region also. Okay, without further ado, we'll take a look at some of the current challenges, and what I want to do is just start off with a poll. We were looking at some research papers before we started today's session, and I think, Adeline, if you can just share the poll as well. Wanted to try and get some audience interaction from those people that are on the call. So, what are the cybersecurity trends that drive the cybersecurity practice changes in 2020 for you? So just trying to get a sense for what are the key things or key considerations that those people that are on the call have been facing this year. You can see at the top there, you've got industrial IoT, cloud and SaaS adoption, edge computing, and then at the end, you've got 5G. Very good, there we go. Interesting, very good. So industrial IoT coming out top. And cloud and SaaS adoption for those that are attending seconds. That's very interesting, very good. Nice to see what everybody's facing, the challenges that we have for 2020. There's probably, I suppose, in terms of what we've seen in the marketplace this year. I was going to talk about if we look at the top left, I think this is a very obvious one. How the pandemic has impacted business, increased levels of remote working. We've seen a huge drive, forced drive by organisations to have people working from home. I suppose critical manufacturing and energy are not industry spaces where you typically have a lot of home working because of the sensitivity of the applications and the nature of the work. But we have seen many organisations through conversations we've had with M.A.C Solutions being forced into that, where they're looking at how do I provision for staff to work at home, the types of devices, the access controls that they put in place, and that's really uncharted territory for some of those organisations. So big challenges for the year. The second one, I just want to point out on the right hand side, 23% experience in delays in implementing cybersecurity measures. So we've seen a lot of this. We deal with energy, nuclear, oil and gas. We do a lot in the defence space, and because of the nature of the homework, and we've seen lots of delays and projects having been put on hold, or because of resources and an inability to access certain systems being slowed down. So two big trends that we certainly have come across. The interesting thing that everyone's talking about have raised in the poll is the 55% of trends forcing revised cybersecurity practices, and we'd concur with that. The industrial IoT has brought around a sea change in how organizations have to adapt to changes in technology, how to traverse different security zones, how to work with contracting resources, with portable and digital assets, and we'll touch on all of those different things as we go through the presentation. But those are definitely the key things that we've been faced and working with M.A.C solutions. So just going to skip on. We also took a look at there are a number of different challenges, but one that we wanted to look at was specifically around removable media threats, and we're going to talk to a story about this as we go through the presentation as well. Something that I think was very interesting and will resonate with everyone on the call. If we were looking at ICS generally versus energy, and taking a look at different countries, and there's lots of different threat actors that are obviously interested in attacking different countries' national critical infrastructure and critical manufacturing facilities. So interesting, when we were looking at this, there's much higher rates in the energy space versus ICS generally. Worms were the most common threat that was blocked. And if you just look down at the bottom, you can see the Russian Federation, where the percentage in ICS is actually lower in energy than it is in ICS generally. And I just want to sort of delineate that. You might often think, why Russia, and why would it have a lower percentage in the energy space? There's a very specific reason. The Russians invest more heavily in software that helps protect and unlock the likes of USB ports on lots of their endpoints in the energy space. So they seem to have a higher penetration in that area. And maybe that's because they're offensively targeting many countries to do the same thing offensively. So to take the protections in place internally themselves. So that was a very interesting outcome from that. That's a very recent research paper from Kaspersky. If we could maybe again just some audience interaction, if we could get some opinions from the chat box. We were taking a look at some of the key threat actors. I know we read a lot about this, you know, whether you're on Wired or Dark Reading or Darknet Diaries, any of the different cyber forums, you can get a sense for the types of people that are out there trying to attack energy and critical infrastructure organizations. But thought this graphic was very interesting in the context of our discussion around capability and intent. And you can see all of the usual suspects. Up at the top left, you've got the capabilities are very high within Russia and China, and obviously the Russian proxies are probably various criminal gangs that are being funded. And one of the things we're interested to try and understand is, if we think about how the intent behind them, who do we think would be sitting in the top right-hand corner if we were thinking about a box for matching capability and intent? So the intent's obviously the desire to actually go and do something. Could have a couple of suggestions around who we think would be there. Interesting for us is how linear the relationship is. So the guys that have got the highest capabilities also, you know, if we sort of look at Iran, also have got the highest level of intent. So consistently across the board, if you look at a lot of the research papers, McKinsey, Gartner papers, etc., Russia, China, and the Russian proxies are definitely the organizations that are most intent in terms of trying to damage the UK national and critical infrastructure. You can see Iran there as well. They're actually emboldened to do something. So while the others might think twice about the implications, Iran are definitely a country that is capable and prepared to take action. Okay, so historically air-gapped operational technology, OT systems, are now online, but myths persist about how these systems are operated and secured. So we're going to take a look at a couple of myths and facts relating to this space. So myth number one, George, air-gapping is the only way to assure security of OT systems.
Yes, no, that's not as simple as it might seem to at first. Essentially, there's plenty of transient devices like USBs or even laptops that can jump over the air gap and carry data that can be potentially malicious into the SCADA network.
Okay, myth number two, a firewall will protect my OT network from attacks originating from the connected IT network.
Again, a firewall should be there, but it shouldn't be the only security control in order to stop potential attack against the SCADA network.
Okay, myth number 3, George. No external connections exist besides the connection to the corporate network.
Well, that would be ideal, but in fact, the reality is not like this. So there's more and more backdoors that are built into different OEM products delivered by vendors, and there's a very good reason for this. In case there's an issue, they need to quickly troubleshoot that, and they would just need remote access. So essentially, that's really not true.
Okay, myth number 4. Employees operate OT equipment to manage production day to day.
Again, it would be great if it was like that, but essentially the operations are increasingly outsourcing this task to vendors, and in some cases those vendors don't even sit on site, so they can connect remotely.
Okay, and last but not least, OEM vendors, SCADA providers adequately secure their equipment.
We see an improvement on this front, but still, when we speak about PLCs or any SCADA equipment, security is not prime. It's mainly functionality. As I said, things improve, but even like contracts don't really force the vendors to provide security built into those products.
Perfect. Okay. Thanks, George. So really interesting findings and some detail around the background and challenges. We're now going to look at the anatomy of an attack. Very interesting story. George is just going to walk us through that. George.
Yes. So the story that we're going to speak today might be not very popular, and that's probably one of the reasons why we choose to speak about this. Everybody heard about Stuxnet or the more popular attacks. This one specifically, it's a very interesting one for various aspects. We call it the nuclear download or the Copperfield operation. So essentially, it all started on a night on 11th of December 2017, where a night shift employee in one of the industrial power plants in the Middle East connected a USB drive to a shared workstation. Obviously, that workstation is used by dozens of employees every day. What that person did, it actually tried to watch a movie from the USB, and the movie was obviously La La Land. That's why you see the hint here. And this movie was previously downloaded by him during his break. What he didn't know is that his action initiated a sequences of events that could have been catastrophic to the power plant. The reason why we chose to speak about this is it's because it has some unique characteristics, and one of the prime characteristics is the different techniques of obfuscation and kind of like avoiding detection. The malware is using, let's call it an off-the-shelf exploit called Rakan, but it was packaged. What's interesting is that it was packaged with a $25 package that you can buy off the dark web, and this kind of like helped to evade detection from the top AV vendors. So essentially what the malware does, it has the ability to hide on a USB drive and at the same time ensure that it will be executed without the user even noticing. So the malware hides all original files on the drive, and it applies hidden system attributes to the original file, but instead it creates an LNK file, which is a shortcut file. It also applies the same icon to the shortcut as for the original file. So when that person double-clicked to run the movie, what actually happened is a Visual Basic script run that kind of like run the initial part of the malware, but immediately after that, it also ran the movie. So an end user will never notice there's something wrong because he clicked and the pretty much the movie started playing. Everything happened in the background. So let's look at how the malware gains persistence, which is one of the first things a malware would try to do. So first thing, it will try to schedule a task on the affected system, and that scheduled task will be executed upon user login. But then it also starts to do something else. So it starts its main loop, and that means every 5 seconds it will do 2 main things. It will try to see if there's anything attached from a removable storage perspective to the workstation, and that's in order to replicate itself. Obviously, it will use the same technique where it just kind of like replaces the original files with a shortcut with the same icon that runs the malicious payload first and then the original file. But most importantly, it will connect to a control infrastructure managed by the attackers, and this allows the attackers to update the malware, execute commands locally, but also exfiltrate data. So that's very important. So the malware analysis team that was, or the incident response team that was called on site, was able to take some action. So the access to the control server was blocked because it was calling an IP that's located in Saudi Arabia. So that was very positive. And after that, like in any other incidents, attribution is very difficult. So there are speculations that this malware has been developed by Saudi Arabia or even by Iran as a retaliation measure immediately after the President Trump declared that the US will move its embassy to Jerusalem. So there's speculations. I hope you find this useful and interesting. We did, and we're going to talk about how this can be avoided a bit later in the presentation.
Super.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, George. And again, I would encourage anyone got any questions that you have, please submit them in the chat function. Again, we're delighted to help cover those off as we go through the rest of the presentation, and particularly at the end. Okay, so background. Just want to cover off a background to OPSWAT. Tell you a little bit about who we are, what we do, what makes us unique, what makes us relevant in the energy and also critical manufacturing space. I'd just like to start off by, I suppose the first thing is we're a mature cybersecurity vendor. We've been around since 2002, so I know technology's been around for a while. We had Windows and things like that from 1995, but 2002 in cybersecurity specifically is a long time. We have a long lineage in nuclear energy, critical manufacturing, and government. The company was founded by our current CEO, Benny Kearney. He's an Israeli guy based in San Francisco. And one of the first, or a number of the first clients we picked up as a company were in the energy sector. So we've evolved a very deep understanding around the challenges from a technology and a business process flow that your type of organizations face. So that started in the US, and the company has successfully evolved across the globe. Many of the challenges you face in that OT, IT, or converged environments are also quite similar to military and defense. So we would have quite a strong footprint in those types of organizations. Also got a headquartered in San Francisco, but we've also got offices in London, South Bank, that we've opened up, and I currently run the M.A.C team from there also. Just wanted to draw your attention. We've got a lot of very high profile clients. We have a very high penetration in government, intelligence, and MOD departments. Specifically in energy, you can see there are lots of tier 1 energy suppliers that we work with on a global basis. We have a number of them in the UK, and we'll talk very briefly about a use case where we've worked with a tier 1 nuclear provider in the UK also, but we can't specifically name who that organization is. So I just want to jump in and try and give you a sense for the technology, the MetaDefender platform itself. This is a busy slide, but we'll get to the crux of what the front end looks like in the next couple of moments. I want you to think about almost like a hub and spoke. The MetaDefender platform is made up of a number of different types of technologies that combined give you a really powerful platform. Along the top, you can see a number of different use case scenarios. For the purpose of the presentation today, and what is typically relevant to critical manufacturing and energy is usually the cross-domain solutions. So those security zones, how you traverse them, how do you manage transient portable assets, contracting resources, etc. So we'll talk to that today. The underlying platform is what sits behind all of these different use cases. So the use cases are different, but the platform and the technology is the same. So just draw your eyes to the bottom left. First of all, I'm going to talk about a couple of these, not all of them. Multiscanning is one of the core tenets of what we have within the MetaDefender platform. We work with 38 global AV vendors. There's a lot of intelligence around that shows a single vendor, if you're working with a single vendor, so for example a McAfee or Symantec, for example, the detection rates can vary day to day, week to week, month to month. We also look at the efficacy rates of the vendors that we work with, and we can see that those variations take place. So sometimes they can be minor, sometimes they can be major. And what we do with the multi-scanning is we allow you to aggregate all of these different vendors' threat intelligence together and consume it in a single package. So you get a consistently high detection rate. But what you also do is drive down the time to detection. So if you think of working in a national critical infrastructure environment, energy, you really want that threat intel extremely quick. So nothing that's out in the wild gets to take hold and do damage. Okay, so that's one thing with the multi-scanning. The second thing, just at the top right, you can see deep CDR. If you think of multi-scanning as detecting known bad threats, we all know this, that's the purpose of signatures. So the malware researchers know that it's bad, they categorize it, and then you're able to check for it. What about zero-day exploits? So the deep CDR functionality is proprietary and unique to us. We're global leaders in this specific technology type. And what we look at is files, any type of file. We've over 100 different file types that we can analyze. This is looking for unknown threats. So if you think of a zero-day exploit that was contained within, it could be a Word document, a PDF, there are many different types of file types. What we do is remove the active content. So we assume everything is bad. We have a zero trust philosophy. We apply that philosophy to those documents and remove the active content. So if there was something that had evaded or was new, it was a zero-day, we would capture it, and if it was contained within a file format that we have scanned for. Okay, so if you think about the platform, known and unknown threats combined within the one platform gives you a really powerful solution to protect your organization. And then, as we talked about at the top, the different use cases in which it can be deployed, mostly in energy and critical infrastructure. It's the cross-domain scenario, and we'll talk about the kiosk use case as that's typically where it's deployed. And the last thing I want to talk about on the MetaDefender platform is the file-based vulnerability piece. We see this with a number of our major clients across Europe. So they may have the kiosk interface being used, where a contractor may bring a device. I want you to visualize a tall ATM type size device. A contractor's walking up with a USB key, for example. He plugs in the USB key, and then it immediately starts to scan the USB key. So the multi-scanning is happening, the deep CDR is happening, and we're also running file-based vulnerability assessments on the files and folders contained therein. And what that allows us to do is come up with a scoring mechanism around those files. So you can have a risk profile around those files and folders also. The person authenticates themselves, who they are. There's different levels of security that they can apply as well. So things like advanced biometrics, vein reading, RFID badge readers, so all of those different types of authentication can be included in the device. If the policy is that the person can take the media into the organization, they're allowed to do that. It may be the case that it's used as a gateway to send the files that are clean and securely through a secure file transfer solution. So we're going to look at some of the workflows specifically around this in a few moments. The last thing I would like to draw your attention to is the deployment types. So on-premise, air-gap, and cloud. What we see a lot in the energy and critical manufacturing space is the air-gapping approach. So they use the kiosk solution with MetaDefender as a gateway to the organization to check the files, the transient devices, assets, and people that are coming in and out as they go about their daily business. A little bit about multi-scanning. As you increase through the different types of packages, the detection rate also increases. So you've got a series of different packages that you can add. We'll cover Windows and Linux. The packages are pre-built or predefined. And as you would expect, the more threat intelligence that you aggregate, the higher the detection rate becomes. You also have the ability to identify custom engines and on instances as well, connect in your existing antivirus investments to the solution also. Just to finish off on the deep content, disarm, and reconstruction philosophy, I said a few moments ago we're global leaders in this. We've been assessed by Homeland Security for this particular type of technology or security philosophy, and they've indicated that we're the #1 globally from a technology perspective. Already mentioned, it doesn't rely on detection. So what we're doing is taking the files and the documents, and we're breaking them down to the binary level. We're removing all active content, so that could be active acts, it could be a JavaScript, it could be an embedded link, for example. We're removing that with the zero trust philosophy. We rebuild the file into its original format minus the active content, and then the organization is able to use the reconstructed file. One of the great things that differentiate us is the levels of recursive scanning that we can do. So we can go multiple layers down into documents. So if there's a PDF embedded within the presentation or something more sophisticated where it's 5, 6, 7 layers down, we can recursively scan down into each of those layers. So sophisticated types of attacks we're aware of. Any changes on the document or the original document file format, for example, if it was originally a Word document that had been manipulated or changed to be masked as a different format, a PDF or something else, we can also identify those potential indicators of compromise. Very sophisticated and powerful technology.
Excellent, thank you, Noel. So what we have here is a visual representation of the internal workflow of the platform and how those technologies that we mentioned so far are actually processing the file, and you see the sequence here. So from left to right, we obviously have the file input, and the first thing that's happening is we're checking the exact file type. We're not relying on the document extension for that, but we're rather looking into the file header. We check the magic signature to determine the exact file type. After that, we proceed to archive extraction, which is a process that's controlled and configured by the admin in the backend. Obviously, after that, every single child object goes to the multi-scanning engine where it gets processed with the number of AV engines that are licensed. We do a file-based vulnerability assessment. We de-weaponize that component, stripping out all the active content that can be potentially exploited. We can also check if there's anything sensitive in that file. And at the end, it results a clean version of that file, a static version, which cannot run any code. It's what we call the de-weaponized version of this file. Well, how this then applies to a real-life scenario. If we move to the next slide, you would see this entire workflow is used in what we call the MetaDefender kiosk. You see different versions of those kiosks. So essentially, the kiosk is the portable media checkpoint. Usually, placed in the low side of the network, where you have contractors, employees, all kind of people coming to process portable media. When I say portable media, it can be anything from USB drives to CD, DVDs, mobile phones. We process all that data with the workflow that was previously shown, and then we transfer it on the high side through a workflow that's depicted in the next slide. And that workflow is using the kiosk. So if we can go to the next slide, all please. Okay, here, so this is the workflow that OPSWAT helps implement. We call it a cross-domain solution simply because it helps move data from low security to high security networks. So if we imagine this as two separate networks, to the left, we have, say, the DMZ part of the network, so the lower security network, and to the right, we have the SCADA network, or the OT part of the infrastructure. The kiosk sits on the low side, as I said. It allows processing all those files. Essentially, the kiosk will put the files in two categories: files that are clean and should be transferred, and files that we should block. Usually infected files, but it can also be files that have known vulnerabilities, the likes of a contractor that comes with a patch for a device, but the patch is actually using open source libraries that have known vulnerabilities, like the likes of an OpenSSL library, for example, that has critical vulnerabilities. We can also block that. Now, the transfer to the high side can be done either through a firewall, or we can integrate with most of the data diode vendors in the market to only allow data to be transferred one way. So that's also possible. We transfer the data to the high side, and that data is stored on what we call MetaDefender Vault. MetaDefender Vault is a secure file storage system that's connected to the backend server technology, so it can continuously scan all the hosted files. So we're not only scanning the files for malware when they are imported into the network, but we can scan them every single hour or every single night, and that helps us potentially block an outbreak. So with new signatures, new detection methods that are released on a daily basis, we have the ability to react faster to outbreaks or new malicious payloads that happen every day. In order to retrieve the files from any workstation in that network, the user can open a web browser, type the IP of the vault or the DNS entry. They log in with their AD account and can download the files locally. Obviously, there are extra security control that we can implement, the likes of a supervisor having to approve the file to be available for download after it's being checked. But also, what's the main benefit of this workflow is that on the high side, we can completely eradicate the use of USB drives. There's no need for USBs anymore because the data can be retrieved from any workstation from the vault. The benefit of doing that is, as you're probably all aware of, the USBs, according to many studies, represent about 30% of the threat surface when it comes to OT networks. Pretty much completely blocking USB access on that network would definitely increase the security posture of the OT part of the network. But if there's a need to still use USBs on some of those workstations, we have what we call the OPSWAT Media Validation Agent. It's a very light agent that can be installed on the machine, and it will only allow access to the data on the USB if the USB has been processed in the kiosk. So if that person followed the security process that's implemented there. Obviously, the opposite of this is also possible. So the reverse process, taking data out, simply uploading a file to the vault and then moving to the kiosk to retrieve the file after the supervisor has approved that action, it's also possible. So it's a very high flexible process of getting data in or out, provides full audit trail, and obviously security. So let's look at how this can actually be used in a network. And if we move to the next slide, I'm sure all of you are familiar with this network segmentation. This is the Purdue model. And OPSWAT has different solutions for each layer of this. So if we're looking from the top, we have solutions that can manage access to cloud resources and can secure files being uploaded to cloud resources. Going down, we have obviously an M.A.C solution. On all the layers, we can implement an M.A.C solution, but what's most important is the malware analysis piece on the data transfer between IT and OT. So this is where the kiosk solution comes in. We analyze all that data before it even reaches the OT network. So we do that at the perimeter. This is the beauty of this process. And there's obviously other processes, other solutions that we can provide, the likes of Meta-Defender Drive, to be able to scan devices in that network that cannot accept any agent installed. We can scan that at rest. But Noel is going to quickly summarize the experience and what's the journey in the next slide, and how long it takes to get those solutions and processes implemented.
Super, thanks, George. I just want to draw back to this workflow diagram. So I'm going to talk about a tier 1 nuclear, a joint customer for M.A.C solutions and OPSWAT. So this workflow, the workflows that are contained within this diagram are exactly what we have implemented in a UK-based tier 1 nuclear provider. So kiosk, vault, and client. So and then depending on the site, various variations depending on security considerations within the site. This is a large implementation we completed last year. So things that we did together that helped ease the passage for the organization and their partners. We will help create model and create a secure and efficient data transfer process. So when we initially engaged, one of the key challenges that they faced was to try and understand the workflows, how our technology worked, how they would need to change their business process and technology workflows. And because of the lineage we have within this environment, we've got lots and lots of experience built up over many years around other organizations. There's a commonality in terms of the challenges in the environment. So we're able to bring that to the table to make that an easy process to engage and understand. We did a light touch pilot, so with implementation and support, working with our partners, M.A.C Solutions, we're able to help guide any organization through that process. We understand how it works and how to make it quick and easy in terms of building up critical success criteria. This was a big thing. We already talked about the processes. We found that one of the key challenges is being able to articulate and document high-level and low-level design type documents and have it signed off, be able to communicate it with more senior stakeholders within the organization, so we can show the benefits and the impact in terms of the changes in implementing these types of processes internally. And then the last thing we've done and we continue to do, we work very closely with all of our partners to ensure that there's a really high-level knowledge transfer for the incumbent customer, and a lot of the organizations that we work with will have a system integrator or a trusted partner like M.A.C Solutions, where they're able to assist with the implementation and ongoing support. So that's the session complete from our perspective. We've just over 40 minutes, so we have a little bit of time to spare in terms of question and answers. I would encourage at this point, if anyone's got any specific questions, if you can ask please on the chat module, then we will be happy to respond and answer. So I'll just give everyone a minute if you want to collect your thoughts and just perhaps write in any questions that you have.
No, thanks so much for that, and George. It's fascinating to me to see that the full scope of it presented there again. And we particularly discussed in the planning of the webinar the bringing out of how much and how great the assistance is to people when they're implementing these sorts of solutions. Would you be able to talk a little bit about customer evaluation as well? Because we support proof of concept and other similar activities.
Yeah, no problem. When you talk about the evaluation, Ian, in terms of the post process or prior to
what would we do customer proof of concept, for example?
Okay, George, I'll let you take that one.
Yes, so customers get full support during a POC. We help design the process based on their needs. Usually with this challenging times now, the POC is mainly around the software part of the products. So we usually take advantage of the existing infrastructure where we deploy the software only for the POC phase. Usually we closely work together to define the scope of the testing, obviously based on the requirements that exist. But all in all, it's very simple. Because it's software-based, it's highly flexible. On top of that, we provide free training on our website, free certification essentially for the admins of the solution. What I usually see is help from OPSWAT side is only needed in the first couple of days, and after that, the customers tend to get self-sufficient in what represents the ongoing maintenance and testing of the solution.
Yeah, so it's that intuitive, George. We do have a couple of questions.
Yes.
So the first one, we have a question about which data diode vendors you have worked with, and I guess that's which data diode vendors can we say are definitely compatible with OPSWAT. Can we say that?
Definitely, and I can also provide a URL where we can we can share that information with. It's actually a great question, as we're working on a new data diode buying guide where we pretty much list out all the data diode vendors that we have tested integrations with and their different protocols supported and so on. So I'm going to paste that URL here in the chat. You just have to download the PDF and all the information is there.
Okay, and the second question is, how does the OPSWAT agent work when you have to use a USB into hardware where there's no agent deployed or possible, like a PLC?
So if the OPSWAT agent is not deployed on the endpoint, there's nothing stopping that user to actually use the data on the USB. The OPSWAT agent is the only piece that forces the user to go back to the kiosk if any data has been changed after the kiosk processed the USB, or if they added new data. So in a situation where you don't really have the ability of installing the agent, I'm afraid there's a matter of controlling USB access there and relying more on the human part. We're aware of this challenge and we're actively working on a solution for it. When we will have more details, we will probably disclose that, but at this moment it's an early stage of a new product that will address this exact challenge.
Yes, and with everything, you always have to look at people, process, and technology, and no single thing will answer all the points, will they? So another question here: how does OPSWAT deal with USB that have native encryption, such as BitLocker?
So USBs, encrypted USBs are supported as long as the encryption asks for a password or for a PIN in order to decrypt the USB. Everything else, that's, say, software-based encryption, where the executable is hosted on a separate partition on a USB, it's not supported, and there's a simple reason for that. The kiosk would have to kind of like set up a man-in-the-middle, I wouldn't call it attack, but a man-in-the-middle technique to catch the decryption keys and decrypt that, which is obviously not possible because all the software encryptions have protection against that. And on top of that, the auto-run feature is disabled on the kiosk in order to protect the machine against attacks. So going to the exact question, if it's BitLocker to go, that's supported. The user would just have to put the password on the kiosk.
Yeah, so fundamentally, you have to be clear as well with people who are coming to your site what can be accepted, don't you? I think that's perfectly reasonable. So maybe a final question: are there any file limits in terms of size with OPSWAT? So, does it max out at 2 terabytes or anything like that?
Not really. Those limits are defined by the admin on the platform itself, but it can be anything from a size perspective. There's no limitations. We have customers scanning video files worth of a couple of terabytes in size. That's like CCTV footage. But yeah, there's virtually no limit.
How if you have someone comes with an extremely large file, what sort of speed would the OPSWAT kiosk be able to scan it?
That's a great question. So the speed depends on the complexity of the file and the number of technologies that are licensed on the OPSWAT side. So obviously, scanning against 35 AV engines would be slower than scanning against 8. But there's a trade-off when you go and choose the number of AV engines between speed and security, so the level of protection. It all goes down to the risk appetite of the business, essentially. But we provide some guidance on the speed depending on the number of AV engines and the technology that's licensed against different file types. We have this publicly available, but what we usually tend to do is to encourage our customers to test the solution, and we're very open in providing testing keys. Test the solution with their own data. It can be a very complex file that it might not be very big, but it can be a compressed file that after archive extraction, it can have millions of objects inside. OPSWAT, it's all about providing the highest level of security. So we're going to decompress and scan every single individual child object. Sometimes that has a performance toll in terms of speed, but what we're trying to do is to provide the best level of security, sometimes against speed, but obviously there are ways to optimize that. There are thresholds that can be configured on the back end to speed up this entire process. So essentially, I think what I'm trying to say is the admin controls everything on the back end when it comes to number of AV engines, technologies included, file sizes, file types, archive extraction process, and everything. So by just tweaking those configurations, we can get to a point where the speed will be obviously within the expectations.
Excellent. So fundamentally, as an organization, as a company, or even as a site, you can set your practicality, your speed, and put that against your need for security and come up with the right balance for yourself.
Correct.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Noel and George. I think we've definitely shown both the reason why OPSWAT solution is needed and also the massive capability of that solution. So I'd like to thank you and thank everyone for attending. The recording of this webinar will be sent out afterwards.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
All right, great, guys. And anyone with any questions, can clearly get in touch with M.A.C Solutions and our partner OPSWAT.